Hello. So this video is a performance review of Lucille Fletcher's Night Watch, performed by Sock Buskin Theatre Company. This was directed by Stephanie Austin. And so I've seen a lot of theater over my life. I am a theater scholar. I am a theater practitioner. I've seen professional theater in different countries, in different states, by different theater companies. I've seen university theater at a number of different universities. I've seen community theater at a number of different community theater companies. I've been involved in three, I guess, technically community theater companies for multiple productions. I think Sock Buskin's Night Watch might be the most perfectly executed piece of theater that I have seen. It was so pitch perfect throughout the entire performance. Literally, I would say there was no beat that did not work to raise the tension, to build anxiety, and to create this sense of dread about what was happening in this play. It was so well done. It was, again, like usually with most theater productions, there's at least a moment where it feels like the sort of spring of tension, if you want to think of it that way, right? Like, there's a dominant emotion that goes into most stories, whether that's for theater, whether that's novels, whatever it is, films, TV, whatever it is. And if you think about that as sort of an emotional spring that's being tightened up to the climax of that story, usually there are moments that don't feel like they are tightening that spring, right? Like they're sort of doing something else. There's something that allows it to ease or to slack. Night Watch did not feel like it had that. So the story is about Elaine Wheeler and her husband, John. Elaine is paranoid. She is anxious, tense, and she seems to essentially be having a psychological breakdown throughout this play. We learn over the course of the play that she has a long history of mental illness, but what prompts this decline is that she and she alone sees a man's dead body in the empty tenement building across the street from her upper-class Manhattan apartment, or Manhattan home. Nobody else sees it. She sees it, and then the blinds come down, hiding the window. And no one really believes her. The police don't really believe it. Her husband, John, doesn't really believe it. But initially, people sort of go along with it, and they're like, okay, well, yeah, we'll send some people to investigate, whatever. The police send people to investigate. There's no evidence of a body there. There's no evidence that anyone has been there. John is not that thrilled with this turn of events. He knows that his wife has had psychological issues before, and he doesn't really necessarily want to deal with it. And Elaine starts experiencing this sort of cascade effect where all of these different things in her environment seem to trigger her anxieties, particularly things that remind her of her first husband, Carl, who had died in a car crash. And in that car crash, Elaine discovered that he was cheating on her. So all of these things, a brooch that her friend Blanche Cook is wearing, this wig that Blanche gets, all of these things start just sort of triggering these memories and these anxieties about Carl's death. And so increasingly, John and Blanche and the psychologist that they bring in, Dr. Tracy Lake, they all sort of conclude that she's having a psychological break and she needs to go to this sanitarium type thing in Switzerland that specializes in the treatment of insomnia, which is one of Elaine's primary symptoms, but will also help her with the anxiety and these sort of feelings of persecution. All of this is amplified when Elaine sees a second body in the window, this time of a blonde woman. And again, people are reluctant to believe her. The police become increasingly frustrated with her and essentially say, "Stop calling us. There is nothing going on. There is no crime here. There were no bodies. You did not see anything." John becomes increasingly frustrated, sometimes moving into the signs of an abuser, if not actually physically abusing her. And eventually John manages to convince Elaine to go to Switzerland. Now, John has an ulterior motive in wanting her to go to Switzerland, which is that he and Blanche Cook have been carrying on an affair, and they want to be able to do that without Elaine around. While all of this is going on, their eccentric neighbor Curtis Appleby periodically shows up, and he sort of strangely vacillates between this very eccentric devotion to Elaine and these very sort of sinister narratives about the evil of this abandoned tenement building, or his sort of theories of what's happened to these murdered bodies, etc., etc. And none of that is particularly helpful to Elaine's mental health, as you might guess. So, eventually, Elaine actually ends up confronting John and Blanche, both about the affair, but also because she produces a key from the company that she and her husband own, a real estate company that they own, to the building across the street. And she confronts John with this key, demanding an explanation for why he would have a key to the building in which she's seen these dead bodies. She eventually runs out of the house to go across to that other building and find these dead bodies and prove that she is not insane. John and Blanche follow her, at which point Elaine shoots them both. Elaine kills them. She then returns to stage, her face, the left half of her face, covered in blood. She makes a phone call to Lieutenant Walker, the police chief, or the police lieutenant who's increasingly gotten frustrated with her, confessing to him that she had killed her wife and his lover. Walker does not believe her, refuses to take her seriously, and refuses to send anyone to investigate. And we find out that Elaine planned the entire thing, that everything that we have seen was her manipulation of those around her so that she could murder her husband and best friend who had betrayed her by having an affair, and that she could get away with it. And it is one of the most chilling thrillers, chilling psychological thrillers, chilling crime stories I've ever seen. It's so, so good. Especially the way that it was performed here. So Elaine Wheeler is has got to be an incredibly taxing role. Like, obviously, I did not play this character, but Elaine is on stage virtually the entire play. There are very short bits where she is off, but she's basically on stage the entire time. And the vast majority of that time, she is tense, paranoid, anxious, if not outright terrified. And Kylie Rae Schultz, who played Elaine, hit all of those emotions consistently and so well, so effectively, so persuasively, that it was incredibly easy to buy the psychological breakdown, right? So that's a super, super difficult thing to maintain a heightened emotional state on stage for a long time. And Schultz did amazingly at it. There was, again, these sort of continual elements of fear, of terror, of anxiety, of dread. And she put so much into that. It had to have been an exhausting role. Alongside that, John Wheeler, played by Ryan Gartland. This is not quite as challenging a role in that John spends more time off stage, but when John is on stage, he is almost always tense and anxious as well. But his is more frustration and suppressed rage, sometimes with that rage sort of spilling out into genuine expressions of rage. And again, not necessarily physical abuse, but the signs of physical abuse, right? Like at one point he throws a glass against the wall, which is a classic sign of an abusive personality. And Gartland, again, every moment that he was on stage, you could feel that tension, right? Like you could, it was almost like you could continually feel that his muscles were clenched, right? That there was that sort of readiness for action. And again, that has to be incredibly emotionally draining to sustain that over a long period of time. And they did it really, really well. And it worked incredibly convincingly. So convincingly, in fact, between Schultz and Gartland, that even after it's revealed at the end that, in fact, Elaine Wheeler has been manipulating everyone around her, and that she, in fact, has been gaslighting her husband, John, and everyone else. My partner, Andy, who had built up this conception of John as gaslighting and abusive, the abusive thing is sort of there's a better argument for that being true. But like, even after it is revealed that that's not what's been going on, she still had that sense of him as gaslighting his wife. So he's so good and so convincing and so believable that it just felt right. The other performance that I need to talk about is Tom McClary, who is one of my absolute favorite actors. He is a legend in the state college community theater scene. I've worked with Tom a couple of times, and he's an amazing, amazing guy. His performance as Curtis Appleby was so perfect. Like, there's that sort of weird quirkiness to him from the first moment that he arrived on stage in this sort of brightly colored, brightly patterned robe with two knit scarves tied around his neck and I forget what kind of hat it was, and these red gloves on. From that first entrance, he was such a weird character who had this sort of campiness, but could, like that, shift from this sort of fun and funny to this very sinister, dark portrayal of this guy, right? Again, when Appleby shifts from his sort of light conversation about the newspaper that he writes, for instance, to here's the history of suicides and murders in that building, Tom absolutely changed 180 degrees, a complete turnaround in the persona. And it was so convincing, and it felt so natural for being such a dramatic shift. The other thing that really helped with this production was the sound and lighting. Chip Taylor, who's another amazing member of the local theater community, whom I've worked with several times. Chip did the sound. Stephanie Austin, who also directed, did lighting. She's incredibly good at lighting. So this is a thing that I think is really interesting. I feel like thrillers are hard to do on stage because they're much easier to do on film. Because I had a film studies professor once who said that film is the most dictatorial of media because the camera can tell you where to look, background music can tell you how to feel, etc., etc. Theater, you have much less control over those things. But for Night Watch, in terms of the sound, we had almost a continual ominous music in the background, which built that tension, right? So you had that sort of cinematic element of incidental music that tells you to feel anxious, to feel tense, to feel afraid throughout this. And then with the lighting, there's some of the best, not necessarily innovative or like new or novel lighting effects, but so well executed with a few of the lighting effects that it was just amazingly good. So to the far side of stage left, there was a grandfather clock. And the beginning of each act, I don't know if these are the exact act breaks, but at the opening of the show, and then after we came back from intermission, that grandfather clock was the only bit of the stage that was lit up as it chimed. And Elaine Wheeler is moving around or doing things, whatever it is, in the darkness. And we see her in this darkened stage, semi-visible, as the clock chimes, and we're seeing the clock lit up. And it was such a good effect because it did create this sort of tension. But then the one that really amazed me, and the image that will stick with me from this play, was the very last moments. When Elaine has finished her phone call to Lieutenant Walker, been told that they will not investigate, that she has essentially gotten away with this double murder. Schultz took 2 fingers, rubbed some of the blood off of her face, came forward to the audience. And you have to understand this. Schultz is very pale. She has very dark hair and heavy eyeliner. I think it's eyeliner. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know makeup that well. There's a bit of a sort of silent film, German expressionist, Clara Bow type aesthetic here, right? And the very stark contrast between eye makeup and dark hair versus very pale skin. And she starts as she looks at the blood and then looks up at the audience, she starts this maniacal laugh. And then the lights cut immediately. to a bright, startling red. And there's a demonic quality to what that did visually, right? That lighting shift where it went suddenly sharp red, and you get that high contrast between Schultz's pale skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. That high, sharp contrast was so terrifying. It was like a scene from a horror movie, and it was done live. And to see something that terrifying live, it is very different from watching it in a horror movie, right? Like, you think about something like Carrie, right, where the red effects, to see it embodied is a very different visceral experience because you don't have that sort of mediation of the screen, right? Like when you're watching a movie, no matter how terrifying it is, on some level, you know this is a movie. There's that mediation, there's that gap between what you were seeing in your experience, the world that you live in and the world of the film. Whereas when you're watching on stage, there is not that mediation, right? There's not that physical or media boundary. And so to have that moment of that violent, psychotic laughter as this character who looks like a demon is the thing that just fills the center of the stage. Boy, howdy, is that a powerful final image. And it was so, so amazing as a theater experience.